Hey guys, Corey with Faymus Media, and today, looks like we got a fight on our hands. So here we are with the battle royal, should you say, between these cameras. Now, I am going to have a full review on the C300, the 4K production camera, the cinema camera, and the pocket cinema camera coming up. In about 24 hours time, I'm going to be doing a review on the pocket cinema camera and, of course, the C300. And then I'm going to be doing the production and cinema cameras next week or the week after. Those are going to be coming out, dedicated reviews. But this is going to be dedicated to how they compare against each other, price versus performance. These guys are going to be battling it right out. It is going to be amazing. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is the price differences between the cameras. So here's what we're going to be looking at. Dynamic range is going to be an aspect. Perceived sharpness and quality of the image detail that the sensor can provide. Of course, low light performance. We're also going to be looking at how you can push the grade. Does it fall apart? And how well does it hold up to pushing contrast and color correction and brightness and all kinds of stuff. Now, I just want to clarify a couple things. First, we're not going to be shooting in 4K RAW, and we're not going to have this video in 4K. What we're going to do is we're going to shoot it in 4K RAW, but downgrade it and downscale it to 1080p to match the 1080p of the C300, and we're going to also do the same for the 2.5K cinema camera. Everything is going to be leveled across the board in 1080p, and then we're going to create the RAW files and convert them to ProRes and compare that to the Canon log on the C300. This way it'll show you what ProRes can do versus the Canon log. Now, of course, the RAW versus Canon log. Now, keep in mind that the Canon C300 and the production camera both are said to be 12 stops dynamic range, whereas the pocket cinema camera and the cinema camera are said to be 13 stops of dynamic range. So it wouldn't surprise me to have the pocket and the cinema camera come out on top a little bit when shooting in RAW for dynamic range, because they're claimed to have a little bit more headroom there. So we're gonna go ahead and get started and do these tests. I gotta get some shots here in the sunlight. Like I said, we're gonna do ungraded and graded shots, and then of course we're gonna be doing the low lights, the screens, look at a couple of features. We're not gonna get directly into all the features of every camera, because that's gonna come in their individual reviews. This is just the epic battle royal. Now we're gonna see what these cameras can do and how well they're willing to fight to be number one. And keep in mind, we're also gonna look at value, best bang for the buck. Considering the pocket cinema camera is only $495 on sale, I think now it went back up to $995. It still puts it as the cheapest camera here, and you still have RAW and you still have ProRes. So we're gonna look at a bunch of those things. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, I almost forgot one thing, very important. I wanna keep it fair across the board since they all take EF Canon EOS lenses. We're gonna be using the Cineprime film lens from Canon, the 24 and the 85mm 1.3 and 1.5T. This way, they're using the exact same lenses to keep it fair. Unfortunately, for the pocket cinema camera, I do not have an EOS EF mount. However, I do have the Panasonic 12 to 35mm f2.8. I'm going to be using that instead. It's a very great lens. It'll still give us a very fair comparison amongst the cameras. I also just want to mention that Blackmagic Design has released the firmware 1.93, which in turn gives you the audio meters and, of course, time remaining, and some nifty features that we've been waiting for a long time. So here we go. First, we're shooting in ProRes, and we're gonna do a dynamic range check against the sky. So here is the film profile in ProRes HQ on the pocket cinema camera. Of course, it's very flat, and there's plenty of room to bring the highlights down and the shadows up with that 10-bit codec. It's just wonderful to grade with. And here you go, you can see the graded footage, and it looks marvelous. Some of the highlights are blown out a little bit, but it's a hard shot for any camera to undertake. A DSLR couldn't even attempt this at all. The sky would be completely blown out. Now you can see side by side the ungraded shot on the left and the graded on the right, and there's a huge difference. It's just fantastic what this little pocket camera can do. And this is a really hard shot to undertake no matter the camera with the sun right there and the sky being extremely bright right now. Shooting in ProRes, I'm going to get a decent dynamic range here. It's going to look pretty good. The sky is going to be just a little bit blown out, but most cameras couldn't handle direct sun flaring from the side with the clouds being lit up by the sun right here in mid-daylight. I wouldn't expect any camera to undertake this shot perfectly anyway, even in RAW, but for ProRes it's handling it pretty well. Now I'm going to take the same shot in RAW, and of course we are going to get more dynamic range. It's going to be great. I think it's going to look fantastic. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
So let's take a look at the RAW clips. This is film flat ungraded while shooting in RAW, and you can see there's plenty of headroom in the shadows and highlights. Very, very flat image, and by the time we grade it, it looks like this. Just marvelous. The sky looks beautiful, the shadows look great, it's very sharp. Goes a long way to have 12-bit RAW with 13 stops of dynamic range. Here we go, side by side, ungraded and graded, and there is a huge difference. The codec in the Pocket Cinema camera is just brilliant, and for the money, it's a steal. It's like a 5-finger discount. And as you can see right here, the ProRes HQ graded versus RAW graded is a huge difference. There's got to be at least a stop difference in dynamic range. Much better on the RAW side.
Well, we've taken that shot, so let's do the other cameras. Keep in mind, too, though, that the Canon codec in the C300 is 50 megabits a second, whereas the ProRes in the 4K is like 880, and the cinema camera is 200 plus. So there's no surprise to us if the cinema and production cameras have a little bit more headroom in color grading, but we're going to find that out. So we're going to be setting up the Blackmagic cinema camera with the Cineprime 24mm from Canon to get the best image quality we possibly can for this test. Now, note that the sunshade is pretty decent in sunlight. It's helping me a lot right now considering the sun is behind the house. It helps take away some of the reflections. In overhead or direct sunlight, it's still really hard to see the touchscreen. There's plenty of options out there which I'm going to be going over in my how to build the Blackmagic cinema and production camera series, which I've got a playlist on that I'm creating and adding new stuff to all the time, and we'll definitely be going over that problem. So here we go. I'm going to be shooting in ProRes first.
So here we go, the film profile in ProRes HQ on the cinema camera. And the dynamic range and headroom here is just fantastic, just like the Pocket Cinema camera. So much room to work with the highlights and the shadows, and here is the graded shot. Just a beautiful image, a little bit more headroom than in the Pocket Cinema camera, and this is actually one of the best images I've ever seen while shooting in ProRes. And here's a comparison between the ProRes HQ ungraded and graded to give you guys a little bit of comparison here to show you the difference that you can get once you grade your ProRes footage.
So now let's go ahead and switch over to RAW and see how much more headroom that we're actually going to have here.
So let's take a look at the RAW footage, and it looks fantastic. There's no doubt this is the best RAW footage in the whole video coming out of the cinema camera with its 13 stops, 12-bit codec. And when you grade it, voila, looks just mind-blowing. There's no words that can describe how good this image looks. No highlight blowouts, shadows look great, fantastic. Let's go ahead and compare it side by side, ungraded to graded. Look at the difference of once you take this footage into DaVinci Resolve and grade it, how much color and dynamic range you're getting out of the cinema camera. Now, let's go ahead and compare ProRes to RAW, and as you can see, there's a big difference, especially in the very dark shadow areas and the highlights of the sky. Gotta love that RAW.
So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the lens off and we're going to swap it out and get the production camera over here. Of course, we do the same thing we did prior. We're going to start by shooting in ProRes. Now we're setting up the ProRes shot.
So here we go, ProRes HQ film profile on the production camera. And as you can see, it's noticeably sharper than the Pocket or the cinema camera. Looks fantastic. Plenty of headroom here, 12 stops of dynamic range. And as you can see, the graded shot looks marvelous, especially for HQ ProRes. You can still see most of the details in the sky. A little bit less detail than on the cinema or the Pocket Cinema camera, but it still does a fantastic job. Here you can see side by side, there's a huge difference once it's graded. And that 4K sensor, man, it's so sharp, it makes my eyes bleed.
Now, let's go ahead and switch over to RAW. Now, it is 4K RAW, but I'm gonna convert it to 1080p after I grade it, so it's gonna be the same resolution as the other cameras, as is going to be the cinema camera, just going to be graded in the native RAW resolution and brought down at 1080p. This way it's the same resolution, but we can see the difference in the dynamic range and how much headroom these cameras truly give you.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the 4K RAW footage converted to 1080p. Shadow detail and highlight details looks fantastic, nice and flat, ready for grading, and it already looks sharp. Let's bring on the grading. Here we go. Perfect colors, vivid blue sky, gorgeous shadows, and tack sharp. I mean, I need to wear some eye protection over here. My eyes are starting to hurt. But in all seriousness, here we go. We're going to compare ungraded to graded. Huge difference in the colors and the sharpness. The dynamic range is just beautiful. Gotta love that 4K sensor. Now let's go ahead and compare the ProRes HQ graded to the raw graded footage. And as you can see, the shadow detail on the bottom of the trees is much better in the raw, and of course the highlights in the sky look much better while shooting in raw as well.
So that wraps up the 4K and the ProRes shooting on the production camera. Let's go ahead and grab the Canon C300 and let's put it to work. So now we got the 24mm Cineprime mounted to the C300. Now to make things fair, we're going to shoot in two different modes. To compare against the RAW, we're going to shoot in the Cinema Flat profile, and to shoot against the ProRes, we're going to shoot in the standard profile.
So here we go, the standard codec for the C300. And as you can see, the shadow detail is lacking a little bit of dynamic range in comparison to the ProRes and the RAW on the Blackmagic cameras. However, the highlights look good and it's sharp, and so do the colors look very good. Now once we grade it, it looks even better. The sky looks more blue, the colors pop more, but the shadow detail is still suffering a little bit. But this is an XF codec and it is in standard. And as you can see side by side, we've corrected some of the colors and made the overall image much better by correcting the standard profile and grading it in DaVinci Resolve.
So now we're switched over to Canon's Cinema profile, and we're going to take a shot with that and see how much more dynamic range it offers and headroom to boost the shadows and bring the highlights down.
So here we go, looking at the Cinema Flat profile in the C300. The sky looks good, it's sharp. The only thing lacking is the shadow details, not quite as good as the Blackmagic cameras, but the codec is doing a pretty good job and it's better than standard. And once we've color corrected, you can see that the sky looks beautiful. The shadow detail is still suffering just a little bit. It's really hard as there's only 12 stops of dynamic range in this camera and it's 8-bit, but it's doing a great job. And as you can see side by side, once it's color corrected, it looks much better, beautiful colors and very sharp. Now here we are going to compare the Cinema Flat profile to the standard profile color corrected. And as you can see, the flat profile gives you much more headroom in the shadows and the sky. It's a beautiful, beautiful setting from Canon. The Cinema Flat profile is the profile to shoot in.
And sitting here looking at it, it looks like it's got some pretty good dynamic range in the Cinema profile.
So let's go ahead and compare the ungraded footage, Canon standard profile, to Blackmagic's 422 HQ ProRes. Now as you can see, the C300 does look a little sharper. Keep in mind I did use the built-in ND filter, whereas the Blackmagic cameras I didn't use anything. Now that we've color corrected here, you can see the footage looks great across the board. More dynamic range in the cinema than the pocket or production camera. The C300 looks amazing. Moving along now to the raw ungraded footage, and it looks pretty amazing on the C300. There's Cinema Flat. However, if you look at the raw footage across the Blackmagic cameras, there's much more dynamic range in the shadow details, which is very important. And as you can see, once we grade the footage, it's no surprise that the cinema camera has the most dynamic range, but that Cinema Flat profile of the C300 is very impressive.
So that concludes the dynamic range test. We're going to go ahead and see how these cameras compare with a sharpness test and a depth of field test. And we're going to see how well they perceive details up close and how much depth of field you can get, considering they're all different sensor sizes. Now, although the C300 and the production camera are both Super 35 sensors, it seems that the Canon sensor is slightly wider and the production camera is a slightly taller sensor. So they're not the exact same size, and the Canon's going to give you a wider angle of view than the production camera will. Now, to make things fair for the pocket camera, I'm going to go ahead and mount the NovaFlex to Nikon adapter, which is fantastic, which will allow me to put an 85 on it and give it the depth of field of 2.0, as the Panasonic 12 to 35 only goes to f2.8, so this will help make the test more fair. Now, the fact that it's a Super 16 sensor, it is smaller than the cinema camera and quite a bit smaller than the Super 35 that's in the C300 and the production camera, which means less depth of field. However, the depth of field looks really good here, and we're close enough to the tree, and shooting at 2.0 is really great. It looks fantastic.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the Pocket Cinema camera shot in RAW and graded in Resolve. If anyone's ever asked the question, can a Super 16 give me great shallow depth of field? Here's your answer. Don't let it hold you back.
So let's go ahead and get the cinema camera. So here we are with the cinema camera at 2.0.
Now we're looking at the cinema camera shot in RAW and graded in Resolve, and that 85mm 1.2 on this camera is just downright nasty. Look at that bokeh.
So here we are now recording at 2.0 on the production camera, and it looks really, really good. On the screen, you can definitely see the difference in the 4K resolution versus the 2.5K. However, I am going to bring the 2.5 and the 4K down to 1080p resolution once I'm done grading it so that everything is fair across the board.
So now looking at the production camera, same thing, shot in RAW, graded in Resolve, and that 85mm 1.2 on the Super 35 looks just beautiful. Look at the bokeh in this shot. Gorgeous.
So let's go ahead and start with the C300.
So now we're going to take a look at the C300, shot in Cinema Flat Profile, graded in DaVinci Resolve, and it looks just beautiful. The colors, the bokeh, it is gorgeous. Look at the colors in that bokeh. Now let's compare the shot side by side, and surprisingly, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera with its Super 16 sensor provides the most shallow depth of field, and in my opinion, it looks the best. So let's go ahead and compare the shot on the tree for sharpness. The C300 and the production camera are about neck and neck, and the cinema and pocket cinema camera don't trail too far behind, as all images here are pretty darn sharp and look great.
So now we've already done the focus test, the depth of field test, the dynamic range test. We're going to go ahead and go inside and get started on the low light test to see how these cameras perform in low light. And then we're going to go ahead and see how everything looks when I push the grade.
So here we go. An important part of the Battle Royal is the low light test, and the Canon C300 is a freak of nature when it comes to low light performance. I had all the lights here all completely dimmed. You could take this camera into a black hole and it would still give you marvelous images. ISO 3200, you're not going to have any noise, and ISO 6400 is cleaner than an OCD person's fingernails. Now we're going to go ahead and push it to 12,800. There's still no visible noise. By the time we make it to 25,600, you can see film grain-like noise, which is very pleasing, might I add. 51,200, the noise does start to become apparent. At 64,000, the noise gets pretty darn rough, and by 80,000 ISO, you've got a whole lot of grain going on. But watch this, a little bit of noise reduction and color correction, a perfectly usable 80,000 ISO in the dark. Wow. Now let's go ahead and start off with the cinema camera in low light. ASA 200 looks crystal clear. Then we're going to go ahead and bump it up to ASA 400. No noise whatsoever. Many people I've spoke to have said that the Blackmagic cameras produce a lot of noise at high ISO. I beg to differ. As you can see, ASA 800, there's still no noise in this image whatsoever. Even at ASA 1600, the film light grain is very minimal and almost unnoticeable. Fantastic images from this camera. A little bit of color correction and noise reduction. Shooting at 1600 is maxing the sensor out, and there's still no noise at all. Fantastic images. Moving on to the production camera, as you notice, it's less sensitive to light than the cinema camera. Still at ASA 200, of course, there's no noise. Now moving along to ASA 400, and there's still zero noise whatsoever, but the colors look good. A little dark, but not too bad. Moving along, maxing the camera out to ASA 800, zero noise whatsoever. These cameras do a great job. Do a little bit of noise reduction for whatever noise there may be hidden back there, and some color correcting, and you can see the image looks fantastic in the dark at ASA 800. Now here we go, moving along to the Pocket Cinema camera, which in my opinion is the best slightly than the other Blackmagic cameras for low light. And as you'll see, ASA 200 and 400 have no noise whatsoever. It's not as sensitive to light as the cinema camera is, so it requires a little bit more light. And as you can see, ASA 800, there's still no noise whatsoever. And moving along to ASA 1600, the images are so clean you could eat off them. No noise at all. But in any case, we're going to do a little light noise reduction and color correction just to make the image 100% perfect. And as you can see, it looks stunning. Now it's time for the rolling shutter test, and as you can see, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera does exhibit some rolling shutter. Although more tame than most DSLRs I've used, it's still noticeable and it's there. The Blackmagic cinema camera does exhibit rolling shutter as well, and surprisingly more so than the pocket cinema camera. So don't be waving your camera around like a crazy buffoon or your footage is going to look like crap. Moving along to the Blackmagic production camera, and I looked like a mental patient on my kitchen counter shaking this thing around trying to create rolling shutter, and I couldn't do it. Blackmagic, you've done it. Global shutter, congratulations. I'm dizzy now, I need to take a break. Moving along to the C300, and there is some noticeable rolling shutter, although very tame in comparison to the cinema or the pocket cinema camera. They did a really good job on this camera, but there is rolling shutter. Now let's go ahead and compare the rolling shutter shots side by side, and you'll see that the production camera stands out like a sore thumb. The rest look like some sort of time warp or chop suey. Now, we're going to freeze that frame, and you can see the only one standing tall is the production camera. The C300, not too bad, but it does have rolling shutter, and the rest of them, well, it's self-explanatory. This looks like a hot mess everywhere. It's making me really dizzy. Now, what would a battle royal be without a sharpness test? Let's bust out the ISO chart. Here we go. Pocket cinema camera's up first. It looks pretty darn good. Even at 300% crop, the image looks really good. Nice and sharp. Probably better than any DSLR on the market. Now, moving along to the Blackmagic cinema camera, and you can see it resolves a little bit more detail than the pocket cinema camera does, which already did a great job in its own right. Cropping in 300%, you'll see the image looks really, really sharp, and it looks overall great. Really good resolve detail when shooting in RAW. Moving along on the Blackmagic production camera, and it's much sharper than the cinema or the pocket cinema camera. Going in 300%, you can see it's tack sharp. This camera truly resolved tons and tons of details. It is just fantastic. The C300 does look like it's producing fantastic sharpness as well. Cropping in 300%, you can see that it's pretty darn close to the production camera, although it's not quite as sharp, which makes me believe the outdoor shots were in favor of the C300 due to the ND filter being on. And as you can see side by side, it's the production camera and the C300 about neck and neck until you crop in, and you can see that the production camera is definitely the sharpest one on the screen. So, which camera's the best? Well, that's a good question. There's no real answer, considering the C300 is the easiest to run and gun and set up. The production camera is the sharpest with the highest resolution and a great balance of dynamic range. The cinema camera has the most dynamic range for less than $2,000, and the pocket cinema camera's got the most bang for buck because it's less than $1,000 and shoots 13 stops of raw dynamic range. So in reality, they're all winners in their own right. You just have to decide which one fits you the most. But the biggest deal breaker for the C300 is the fact of its sub $12,000 price tag. It is a great camera and one of the best video cameras I've ever used. However, the price really does a number on your budget. Now, if you're on a budget shoot, the production camera, the cinema camera, and the pocket cinema camera are all amazing cameras. Just be aware of the fact that they do require a bunch of extra goodies to make them as run and gun as the C300. But once again, they're all fantastic cameras, and they are all better than shooting on a DSLR.
So guys, this was an amazing battle royal. These cameras went through war in the last couple of days, and I put them through their tests and their paces every chance I got. There's no way for me to say which camera is better than one another definitively. You just have to figure out from the tests I've done which one fits your needs better. But price is something that you have to consider when purchasing gear, and if that's the case, everything on this side of the screen is what you could get for the same price as the C300, which is a 4K, a 2.5K, and a couple of lenses, and a pocket cinema camera. Now, money and cost isn't everything. I know quality comes at a price. However, you have to look at one thing. Not that I'm saying the C300 is a bad camera, because by no means it isn't. It's actually one of the best cameras I've ever used. But if you're just looking at budget factor, if you're on a budget, these cameras over here are $2,000 and $3,000 and $995, and this one here is $12,000. And you're getting 8-bit MPEG-2 50 megabits a second versus 10-bit ProRes and 12-bit RAW. So that's something to consider. But and in all, the great things about the C300 is for run and gun shooters, it's smaller file sizes, it's easier to dump a CF card, it's easier to grab it and run and gun. The batteries are interchangeable and fairly inexpensive and last quite a bit, in the range of 2 hours each battery. It's not that heavy. It's got a great monitor that's truly honest, and it's got built-in recording possibilities for audio. You just have to have an XLR microphone. It's got the phantom power built in, the built-in ND filters, which is amazing, and it is a 4K sensor. It's just downscaling to 1080p internally, which is unlocked in the C500, which is a lot more money. You could buy a car and put a down payment on a second car for that kind of money. But this camera is great. It's just really expensive, and it's aimed at a certain market because it does things a certain way, and it fits flawlessly into your workflow if you're a professional that runs guns and does news shooting or high-end production weddings, or if you're in the background scenes of movies doing testimonials or even documentary stuff. However, true film directors and videographers and people who are in full production that want the highest quality and the best bang for buck, the Blackmagic would be for you. And as you can see in some of the tests we did, the Blackmagic 4K production camera is sharper and has better image quality than the Canon C300. Now, on the outside test, you can clearly see that the C300 in some spots looked better, but that was because the ND filter also has a UV filter built in, so it actually removes some of the haze, which we didn't have with the production camera. You can see by the ISO chart test, though, that the production camera is the highest resolution and sharpest camera of all the bunch, and it's only $2,900. So that's a win in its own right. However, if we're gonna say which camera wins best bang for buck overall, money to cost to value, this would be the winner of all the cameras, clearly because it was $500 on sale and it's still regular priced at $995. You're getting 12-bit RAW, 13 stops of dynamic range, and 10-bit ProRes HQ, and 422, and proxy, and LT. And it takes SD cards and interchangeable removable batteries from the ENL E20 Nikon, and they're only $15 and they last over an hour and a half each. So this is the best bang for buck. It's not as sharp as the production camera or the C300 per se, but not everything's about sharpness and tests. Let's talk about real world shooting. All these tests I did, will give you guys a great direction on what you want, what you're getting for the, best bang for buck. But when it comes down to real world shooting and best bang for buck and value, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera would win this test just based on value for quality, and they make cages and all kinds of stuff for it. It's not to say that it's outright better for you per se or better than any of the other cameras, just the value. It really comes down to what you're looking for. I mean, if you already have an Arri Alexa and for bragging rights you want to have a $3,000 4K boat anchor, then you could buy one just for that. But in reality, what it really comes down to, guys, is what you're shooting and what you need, and hopefully this test has been able to give you those results that you were looking for. I just want to give a big shout out to CSI Rentals in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. They are hooking me up with all kinds of stuff. So we're going to be bringing you guys all kinds of reviews. So make sure to check them out, csirentals.com. So hopefully you found this review helpful. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and if you want to purchase any of the gear I reviewed today, or should I say over the last couple of days, almost a week actually, please use the information box below, and please use those links to support my channel and keep the great reviews coming. I'm Corey with Faymus Media, and happy shooting.